Hello and welcome to Useful Idiots. I'm Katie Helper.
I'm Aaron Mate. Hey, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us. Another very scary and dangerous week in the world, and we're here to talk about it, laugh about it a little bit. Our website is usefulidiotspodcast.com. Go there, support the show, and get bonus content,
including extended interviews and also a great feature, Thursday Throwdown, which is your midweek dose of media madness. And that is very therapeutic because you've got to laugh at the news or else you'll just cry at it.
All right. Well, let's kick it off with our four basic food groups. For Democrats suck, let's turn to supposedly the person in charge of the Democratic Party and the country itself, Joe Biden. He's still the president, even though he stepped down as the Democratic presidential nominee. But where is he? You have a constantly escalating conflict in the Middle East, with Israel continuing to commit mass murder in Gaza. It's assassinated the political leader of Hamas, Ismail Haniyeh, in Iran, which is an act of war against Iran. It's launching strikes against Lebanon. The U.S. is also carrying out airstrikes in Iraq and Yemen. And where's Joe Biden in all of this? He's been missing in action. Well, at the White House, Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre was asked, where's Joe?
It would be something that ordinarily we would expect to
Stay tuned. I just said that you're going to hear from the president later this week. And look, I think when it comes to the Middle East, when it comes to foreign policy more broadly, this is a president that has a record to stand on when it relates to making sure we're putting the national security of the American people first. This is something that he's done, making sure that we re-engage with our allies and also our partners. We saw what happened in the La Paz administration. The president had to fix those relationships, and he did that in the last 3.5 years. When you think about reinvigorating NATO, you think about how the people of Ukraine has what it needs now to defend itself against Russia's aggression so they can fight for their democracy and freedom. This is a president that has a long list of foreign policy accomplishments that he's incredibly proud of. And when it comes to the Middle East, the president has been incredibly engaged from certainly from day one of what we have been seeing the developments there over the past just under a year. But he's going to continue to do that. You're going to continue to hear from him, and that will not change.
So Karine Jean-Pierre says that Joe Biden has so much to be proud of. He's so proud of his foreign policy record. He's been so engaged. But let's be clear. It's perfectly consistent for the Middle East to basically be at risk of now a wider war, and for Joe Biden to brag about his record, because Joe Biden is the guy who, back in October, shortly after the October 7th attack by Hamas, he bragged openly that the U.S. could fuel two wars at the same time, which is exactly what the U.S. is doing. This is what Biden said.
Are the wars in Israel and Ukraine more than the United States can take on at the same time?
We're the United States of America, for God's sake. The most powerful nation in the history, not in the world, in the history of the world. The history of the world. We can take care of both of these and still maintain our overall international defense. We have the capacity to do this, and we have an obligation to. We are the essential nation, as to paraphrase the former Secretary of State. And if we don't, who does?
You know, looking back on that clip now, this is back in October. You have a president bragging that we can fuel two wars at the same time. He's not saying we can bring these two wars to an end, we can have peace. He's saying we can fuel them because we're the United States, for Christ's sakes. He's bragging about it. And that should have been a very early sign that we were headed to exactly the kind of apocalyptic, dangerous scenario that we're in right now, because you have a president who is proud that he can fuel two major wars. And that's exactly what he's done.
Yeah, I mean, Aaron, Karine Jean-Pierre is right. He does have a record to stand on. And it's a record of, she brought up Ukraine. So it's a record of helping create and prolong the proxy war. He has a record of enabling genocide in Israel. So she's not wrong on that front. I also like the way she's like, stay tuned. Stay tuned.
Yeah, stay tuned.
It's really exciting.
Yes. We get to hear from the guy who's proud of fueling two wars. I can't wait what useful contribution he's going to make to this awful situation.
Let's turn now to Republican suck, where Senator Lindsey Graham is really, really representing hard for Republicans. So as people know, Israel just assassinated Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh in Iran, which is a quite provocative thing to do to Iran and also to, of course, get in the way and sabotage any potential ceasefire or negotiations. But some people may want de-escalation. That's not what Lindsey Graham wants. He wants Israel to bomb Iran. Let's take a look at what he said on Fox News.
I am calling tonight for Israel to destroy the oil refineries that fuel this terrorist beast. Destroy the oil refineries and they will knock this off. Until you hit the Ayatollah where it hurts in his pocketbook, he could care less about how many Hezbollah people you kill or Hamas people you kill, but he does care about his economy and his ability to make money to wage war. So to our friends in Israel, knock out their refineries.
Okay, there you have it. That is Lindsey Graham, a sitting senator's advice for Israel. I think he may be honestly trying to stoke World War. And he also introduced a war powers resolution that would enable not just Israel, but the United States to bomb Iran. So he's talking the talk and trying to walk the walk.
Lindsey Graham, if he ran a consulting company, every suggestion or every piece of advice, every contribution would just be bomb, just bomb, just bomb, bomb, bomb. That's pretty much all he can see.
You know, it reminds me of John McCain, who at least had a catchy tune to advocate for this policy. Bomb, 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 Iran. Bomb, 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 Iran. Yeah.
Yeah, that was John McCain's contribution. And Lindsey Graham, he doesn't have any songs. He just goes on TV and does spoken word when he advocates bombing Iran.
Yeah. What do we got for Isn't That Weird?
For Isn't That Weird, a really big new talking point for Democrats is not that Republicans are fascists who are going to end our democracy. I mean, they're still saying that, but now they got something else. Now they're going around and really leaning into calling Trump and the Republicans weird. Everywhere you turn now, MSNBC, CNN, the campaign speeches, Democrats and their allies are just calling Republicans weird. And I got to say, Trump is giving them some material. I mean, you can't deny that. So here, for example, is Trump and his running mate, J.D. Vance, talking about love and partnership. And they have some interesting thoughts. So here is Trump recounting how his wife, Melania, has responded to his assassination attempt.
What was Melania's reaction, if you don't mind my asking? I know this is very personal, when she learned about what happened on that field in Butler?
She was watching.
Oh, she was watching in real time?
She was watching live. It was all over the place. It was on television. It was on your network, but it was all over the place. And she was watching. I asked her that. I mean, I wasn't there. I was on the ground. And when the world started to, like, you could talk to people, I said, so what was your feeling? And she was, she can't really even talk about it.
Traumatized.
Which is okay, because that means she likes me.
No, she
loves me.
That's good.
I mean, let's say she could talk about it freely. That wouldn't be, I'm not so sure which is better. But she either likes or loves me, and that's nice. But
one of the two. Interesting.
Well, that's great. Well, I mean, for Trump to go through that horrible ordeal, at least he found out that his wife either likes or loves him. So that's important. But honestly, I do actually appreciate how open he is about this. I mean, the standard thing in a politician is to pretend as if everything's great in your marriage, your wife or your spouse is so devoted to you. You know, Trump is actually being a little bit more honest here. He's not quite sure sometimes if his wife loves him or likes him. So, you know, fair enough. Here's more. Trump is speaking about the widow of Corey Comparatore, who is the Pennsylvania man who was killed, shielding his family from the assassin's bullets when he fired on Trump. And this man was killed, you know, shielding his family from the bullets. And Trump spoke about speaking to his widow.
But you know what? Corey's wife said, I'd rather have my husband. Isn't that good? I know a lot of wives that would not say that. I'm sorry. They would not say that. But no, it's a great family. He was a great man.
He must be talking about his own wife there. I mean, I don't know who else he's speaking about. So again, you know, this new Trump of being sort of pretty clearly sharing the struggles in his marriage. I don't know. I actually kind of appreciate.
Yeah, he's projecting his own insecurity about his marriage, about whether or not his wife loves him onto Corey and his wife. And so he's actually relieved that she would rather have her husband, which is a pretty low bar. I mean, one would hope that anyone whose partner was killed would rather that partner not be killed.
I mean, now someone might watch this and say he's just making a joke. He's making light of the struggles of marriages, and he's trying to bring some levity to a sad situation. And but that might be true, but based on again everything he's saying so far about Melania, it does sound like there's a real insecurity there in that partnership. And I'm here for it. We're here for you, Trump.
But even if he were doing that, that's really weird. Also, like, the guy was just killed. It's a little early to be making punchlines.
It certainly is. For someone who just died, yes, it's definitely early to be joking about it. Yeah, given that she just lost her husband. Yes, absolutely.
Really insane.
All right.
Wow.
Well, JD Vance also has thoughts on his relationship. And, he's married to a woman of color. His wife is Indian. And some of his white supremacist fans are not happy about that. So he addressed them in an interview.
Look, I love my wife so much. I love her because she's who she is. Obviously, she's not a white person, and we've been attacked by some white supremacists over that. But I love Usha. She's such a good mom.
All right. Well, next time you're attacked by white supremacists for not being married to a white woman, I just don't think you need to defend yourself. I don't think you need to go to your way to acknowledge the white supremacists who are upset at you for not marrying a white woman. I just think you call them racist and move on.
I like it's almost like he's saying, despite the fact that she's not white, okay, we all know she's not white, but she's still a good person.
Yeah, I know some white supremacists are mad at me. I apologize. Let's meet together. I'll try to sell you on her.
Yeah.
And prove to you that she's a worthy person, even though she's not white.
Yeah, you love her. Once you meet her, you'll love her. You'll forget that she's not white. That's how great she is. So for Isn't That Terrible, we have a perhaps useful story, depending on how we look at it. Costco is selling apocalypse dinner kits that will last for 25 years at the very reasonable price of $100. Let's take a look at this Instagram video where someone found these and gives a little review.
So I'm in Costco, which is like my happiest place in the world to be.
It's a little weird.
And I've never seen anything like this before. They have buckets that they're just calling emergency food supply for 132 servings. And what is included in this bucket? I guess this is for when the apocalypse hits, which could be any time now, right? Who knows? We get teriyaki rice, a 6-serving pouch, pasta Alfredo, 6-serving pouch, cheesy macaroni, apple cinnamon cereal, tomato soup with pasta, creamy pasta and vegetables, brown sugar and maple multigrain cereal, all 6 servings for each. And then again, continuing on, barbecue beans, vanilla pudding, orange drink mix, whey milk alternative, Southwest rice and beans, and chicken flavored noodle soup. All up to 25-year shelf life, 132 servings, $63. So when the world collapses and caves in, as long as you have your ReadyWise emergency food supply, all's right with the world. I really want to sample this. Why don't they have this here for free samples?
So yeah, this is made available by this company called ReadyWise, which kind of specializes in survivalism products, food. They have different baskets, buckets, freeze-dried fruit buckets, freeze-dried powdered eggs. And you can, for these great buckets, all you have to do is add water. So it's a great gift. Fruit baskets are kind of cliched, overplayed. You may want to look into these ready-made survivalist packages.
Well, going back to an earlier clip, as soon as Joe Biden bragged about how the U.S. can fuel 2 major wars at the same time, people should be rushing to the shelves. I mean, I'm sorry to do free advertising for this product. We don't do that on this show. But in this case, Joe Biden created a really strong market for these people, for the sellers of Armageddon supplies, because he's feeling it. And yeah, I'm surprised there's still even some left based on how the world is going.
Right. They're probably flying off the shelf, especially for Christian Zionists.
Well, yes, but they're excited.
No, I know. Right. They're excited, but they probably still want to prepare, right?
Yeah. They're excited for the rapture that
the
Israel
rapture ready.
is bringing every single day.
Yeah. Those are your 4 basic food groups. We are so excited to be joined by journalist at the Gray Zone, Anya Parampil. She's also the author of Corporate Coup, Venezuela and the End of U.S. Empire.
And Venezuela is in the news right now because there's just been an election and it's been contested by the opposition, which claims that the president, Nicolas Maduro, stole it. And of course, the Biden administration is weighing in because Biden has taken part in this bipartisan effort to overthrow Venezuela's government going back 2 decades. A long history of regime change. And the main vehicle has been crippling sanctions with the aim of destroying Venezuela's economy. And funnily enough, a few days before the election, the Washington Post came out with this long article basically saying that the Trump administration knew that their sanctions on Venezuela would destroy its economy and fuel migration. But John Bolton and Mike Pompeo and all those other geniuses, up to Donald Trump himself, ignored it because they were so committed to regime change. And Anya, in her book, Corporate Coup, documents this history. And it's very fascinating. And there's a lot to discuss. And I've been to Venezuela before with Anya. We went in 2019 when the whole Trump Venezuela coup kicked off. And it was a very fascinating experience. And so we'll get into that a little bit and a whole lot more. So this is Anya Parampil. Anya Parampil, thanks so much for joining us.
Good to be with you guys.
As we're recording this, there is an ongoing dispute over Venezuela's elections. The Venezuelan opposition is claiming with certainty it was stolen. Maduro, who's claimed victory, has said he wants to put this to Venezuela's Supreme Court to clear up any doubt. Meanwhile, the U.S. is leading the charge in casting doubt on this election. From your vantage point, where do things stand?
That's a pretty good summary on just the surface level, but then on the deeper point, I think that we should note, first of all, that the Venezuelan opposition have responded to elections that they've lost like this every single election since Chavez died. They've gone into the streets and claimed fraud. If they lost, they have won elections. They won a National Assembly election in 2015. They didn't protest that one, those results, but they also, before the results were even announced, or even before the vote was held, had already said that they weren't going to recognize the results unless they won. That's easy to find in mainstream media. And they usually produce no evidence. They've never produced evidence when they claim fraud. What's different about this time around is that the Venezuelan the National Election Council has not released the polling data from individual polling stations, which they didn't have to do the night of, according to their constitution. They had 3 days to release those numbers. But in the interim, Maria Corina Machado, the figure behind the main opposition candidate, Edmundo Gonzalez, not only alleged fraud, but uploaded her own data claiming, because, part of Venezuela's process is that when they're counting these votes, the parties all have people present to monitor the situation and make sure that everything's going smoothly. So all the parties collect their own data. And she released her party's data claiming to demonstrate that the opposition actually won, because she has what they're called like actos, the final tally that comes out of every individual polling station. And so she's uploaded those online, and like clockwork, the Venezuelan opposition, or honestly, the people in the streets in many of these cases now, are not even politically motivated. They're criminal gangs that get paid basically to go and wreak havoc. They set up barricades and try to block streets, try to block just shipping all around the country to strangle the economy, kind of an extension of the sanctions. And they shot guns and weapons at Venezuelan police and National Guard troops. So whenever you have, within days of election, I mean, can you imagine if this happened in the U.S., if MAGA had armed themselves and begun a march toward the White House and fired at U.S. troops or National Guard troops? I mean, that would have told a very different story than January 6th. It would have been what many claim January 6th was actually taking place, and that's what you had within hours in Venezuela. So because the CNE did not come out with its own data, it created this vacuum where Colombia, Brazil, Mexico, some countries, while they offered verbal support, rhetorical support to Maduro, did not come out and immediately recognize the results. And it also led the Carter Center to criticize the vote process, even though, according to Venezuela's sovereign process, they didn't necessarily have to release those numbers right away. It still created all of this sound in the media that, of course, the New York Times and international corporate media picked up on in order to claim and paint the election as fraudulent. And then you have chaos in the streets, a very fluid situation where it's hard to know at any moment if civil war or something more dire is going to break out. And so Maduro's decision was to actually call on all of the parties, all parties that participated in the vote, to now present their data from the election to the Supreme Court so that the Supreme Court can run an independent audit of the vote based on all of the collective data. One other point that I'll make is just about the process, the voting process in Venezuela, because it's very different than what we have in the United States. I observed the last National Assembly vote there in 2020. And so I've seen this process firsthand. And the way that it works is to vote, you have to first present a physical photo ID. Then you do a physical scan of your fingerprint in order to activate your ballot. You vote. And then, first of all, the electronic voting machines, unlike in the US, they're isolated. They're not connected to the internet. So that makes them more secure in the view of many observers. And then on top of that, you automatically get a physical receipt of your ballot, something that we, again, don't have here, just like we don't have the identification process to begin the vote. And then you drop that physical ballot into a box, a secure box on site. That physical tally is automatically audited. 54% of those votes are automatically audited against the electronic tally, in order to assuage fears that there was any tampering with the electronic vote, even though, as I mentioned, it's not connected to the internet. So it's a very secure process. It's the kind of process that is difficult to fudge. So the Supreme Court, with all of the data, should be able to determine what the truth is. And, you know, if the opposition came up with some actos that, if they have it all online right now claiming that they won, it should be easy for the Supreme Court and the National Electoral Council to dispel. But fortunately, in the last day or so, it looks as if the violence in the street has actually calmed down. There were many arrests, and people made confessions, that they were just out, they were paid to go kind of start a riot. And at this point, it doesn't look as if it's escalating, but with the opposition refusing to back down, it's still a kind of wait and see period. That this, again, it happens every time there's an election. And a lot of how it plays out has to do with how Washington and regional players decide to respond. But most of all, it's whether or not the Venezuelan people in public decide to, or in the streets, to defend their government and their right to be sovereign.
You aren't there in Venezuela now, but can you talk about the kind of opposition activity that you observed when you were there last?
Well, when I was there last, the opposition were boycotting the election. So this is an interesting point to consider as well, is that another interviewer was asking me yesterday about the change in support for Maduro between 2018 and this latest vote, because he dropped by, according to the government data, the government numbers, he still did lose considerable support compared to the last election. But that's because for the last several elections, the Venezuelan extreme US-backed opposition faction have actually had the strategy of boycotting the vote. From 2018 on, their strategy was basically to say, we shouldn't participate in this process because then it looks like Maduro is running this one-party state. If he wins 100% of the vote, then we can kind of claim, oh, look, it's just a dictatorship. And even to prove that point, the moderate opposition forces that exist in the country that are sidelined by these crazy this crazy US backed group, when they tried to participate, when the candidate Henri Falcone ran in the last election against Maduro, despite the opposition boycott, the US actually threatened him with sanctions because they wanted so badly to limit the choices for Venezuelans at the ballot box, these Americans that care so much about democracy in Venezuela. And then the last time I was there in 2020, it was local and national legislative elections. It was the same. The U.S. backed opposition were boycotting. Leopoldo Lopez and that faction, the Maria Corina Machado faction, were boycotting, and the moderate opposition politicians that participated in the vote were actually just like bullied so severely by those other opposition groups, because they said they were like plants of Maduro's Socialist Party. Reuters even published an article smearing these anti-Maduro opposition candidates that I've spoken with, and they can't stand the government. They're basically on the side of the U.S. backed opposition. If like we're really going to divide it between two teams here, and yet Reuters smeared them as being agents of Maduro, which is just very cynical, because these are people that are actually working to have more of a voice in their country. That's not just the ruling party, and yet they're not even allowed to be. They're not even taken seriously by the media outlets outside of Venezuela, and so there was less participation in the last presidential vote because of that boycott. The people that showed up during this most recent vote in order to vote for Maria Corina Machado just weren't voting in the last two rounds. So that's why there's that disparity in the numbers. And basically, since Juan Guaido's little shadow puppet regime was rolled out and the U.S. recognized this corporate shadow government in Venezuela, it took a lot of momentum out of the opposition street game, because after Chavez died, there were first immediately in 2014, the opposition saw this chance to overthrow Chavismo. Maria Corina Machado was out there once again at that period, riling up protesters, the Guarimba riots that were violent in the street, saying, these were called the La Salida, or exit protests, because they said, we're not going to leave the streets until Maduro exits. Well, they eventually left the streets and Maduro remained in power. And they periodically revolted like that for several years, again in 2015, again in 2016, 17. They stopped because in 2019, when Guaido came into the picture, it was kind of like, well, if we're claiming that this guy is president, we can't really go out into the street and have these big anti-Maduro protests, because then we'd be admitting that our regime change scheme is fake. And so there was, the first time we went to Venezuela, Aaron, you'll remember the big protests or like movement in support of Guaido. They were kind of just billed as rallies, but they weren't like, we need to change the government because, well, we just claimed that we took over the government. And it created this weird dynamic where the opposition was not out in the street, but still not in power. And so this election, because now the whole Guaido puppet theater show has basically ended. Their run on Broadway came to a close, and since that phony scheme, just the mask got ripped off of it, then they had to show that they're not actually in power anymore, that they were trying to run someone else for president, and now they are back into this position of being the victims of the regime, where for a while, for a few years, because of Guaido, that narrative had been kind of put to bed.
What I remember from that Juan Guaido rally that we went to in Venezuela, this is like early 2019 when we were there, right?
February 2019.
And this is right after the Trump administration, launches their big coup attempt in Venezuela, trying to install Juan Guaido. Is that I remember, Juan Guaido and other people speaking at the rally were calling Maduro like the worst names possible, like insulting his mother. And I remember thinking, like, Maduro's supposed to be a dictator, and yet there's this, really big rally in the streets of the capital, and they're insulting the president and his mother. And if this really was a dictatorship, I don't think that this would be happening. But since we're talking about Maria Machado, the leader of the opposition, who Maduro is named as like the person behind efforts to steal the election from him. She just wrote an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal saying that she's in hiding, in fear of her life. Let me bring up an old picture of her from a few presidents ago. Here she is with George W. Bush. And this is around the time when the Bush administration, they were launching their own coup attempt against Maduro's predecessor, Hugo Chavez. And they briefly succeeded. Chavez was briefly overthrown, and then he was restored, essentially by the people of Venezuela in a massive show of support for him, along with the military. But there she is with Bush. Tell us more about her and, the extent to which the opposition collaborates with the U.S.
It's quite remarkable that in 2024, she's still kicking around at the top of the opposition. You'd think, I guess they already rolled out their younger people under Guaido and it didn't really work. And so they're back with their original regime change agents. Maria Corina Machado, I mean, I write a lot about her in the book because kind of every step of the way of attempts to overthrow Chavismo, she's front and center. And we know a lot of this thanks to WikiLeaks files that show she was selected in 2003 under Bush as kind of one of the most promising anti-Chavista activists, and she was selected as a civil society leader that would receive U.S. AID and State Department backing. And during that coup that you mentioned in 2002, when the military temporarily removed Chavez and installed the leader of the Commerce Department, basically Pedro Carmona, as head of the government, one of the first acts that Carmona made was to issue this decree called the Carmona Decree that temporarily suspended basically all government functions other than his, suspended all the municipal, local government offices, suspended the Supreme Court, the legislature, all that, and then had these civil society groups and business leaders in Caracas sign on to it and endorse it. And Maria Corina Machado was one of those people back then who signed it on behalf of her civil society organization that then, get this, ran a campaign, her organization, Sumate, or Join Up, Rise Up, that's what it's called, then ran a campaign to recall Chavez from office. And so the U.S. backed that campaign, and actually she worked with Ana Julia Jatar, who is the wife of Ricardo Hausman. They ran this organization together, the mother of Joanna Hausman, and failed. They eventually got enough signatures to have the national recall vote, and they didn't succeed. They didn't get it. They didn't pass. Chavez survived, and Ricardo Hausman then used his position at I believe he was at Harvard then in the U.S. and made this report with a colleague at MIT, claiming that his wife's project had been, defrauded and that it was all legitimate, produced no evidence. And Mark Weisbrot from CEPR at the time did a great takedown of Ricardo Hausman there, defending Maria Corina Machado and Ana Julia Jatar then. Chavez dies in 2013, and you have, as I mentioned, the La Salida campaign, and she was competing at that point with Leopoldo Lopez, the other main figure of the opposition that was kind of seen as the brains and the muscle behind Guaido, who's now in Spain, for the throne of the U.S. radical right-wing opposition there. And Leopoldo beat her in that moment because he led this campaign where there ended up being an assault on the judiciary in Venezuela, and he was jailed. He eventually escaped. But because all of that happened to him, he kind of became the face of the radical opposition, and she was sidelined throughout all these years. So now she's emerging again. She tried to initially run. She was blocked because she's a foreign agent. She receives, backing from the United States. So they put this other widely unknown figure, Edmundo Gonzalez, on the ticket. And he, at the time, was kind of, like I mentioned, this unknown academic. In fact, he's pretty old. He's in his 80s. He's a lot like Biden. He can't get through interviews. She's always there with him, helping him through interviews. She was with him on the stage at like all of his major campaign rallies. He couldn't even stand up during his closing campaign rally in Venezuela. He was just sitting in a chair because he was, you know, he's just part of that like gerontocracy that we're even fighting here in the United States still. And she's clearly the one running the show. But Edmundo Gonzalez is worth noting and paying attention to as well, because he was a high-level functionary in the foreign ministry, in the diplomatic corps of Venezuela in the pre-Chavez era. And he actually worked out of the Salvadoran embassy, Venezuela's embassy in El Salvador, I should say, in the 1980s, when the United States was working in El Salvador, running a dirty war against Nicaragua and forces, you know, guerrilla fighters in El Salvador. So he, at that time, Venezuela was a partner of the U.S., an ally of the U.S. in that campaign. And who was running that campaign on the U.S. side? Elliott Abrams, the one who later was convicted for his role, for lying to Congress about his role in Iran-Contra. Fast forward to 2002, Elliott Abrams was the figure on the Bush National Security Council who oversaw the coup attempt against Chavez then. I mean, that's just reported in The Guardian. It's open, confirmed that he was, you know, the one masterminding that, probably meeting with Maria Corina Machado when she's seen in those pictures with Bush. And then he became Trump's Venezuela envoy in 2019 following this coup, and he's still advising the Biden administration today. So when you see people like Edmundo Gonzalez and Maria Corina Machado as the faces of the Venezuelan opposition in this latest round of elections, you have to wonder how much they're communicating with Elliott Abrams and some of the, you know, dark swamp creatures that we really just, for some reason, can't get out of our government. It's wild to think that these are people that have been up to this since the 1980s. You know, Maria Corina, she's a bit younger, but she even herself has been doing this for almost 30 years. And she, you know, in her mind, she's well, maybe a few days ago, she thought she had a chance at power. But honestly, you know, to hear that now she thinks she's afraid for her life or she's in hiding, in most countries, if you did what she did, that would be the case. You know, and in many countries, she would have already been exiled a long time ago. People, I think, are asking questions about how she even was, you know, she was running around holding these huge rallies, and she is a foreign agent of the United States. So I don't think you could get away with that here, for example, considering what they allege about Trump and Russia. Like, if there were any receipts the way that there are with her, can you imagine?
Well, you know, going back to Elliott Abrams for a second, who you've pointed out has an uncanny resemblance to Gargamel of the Smurfs.
Yeah.
Let's hear from the man himself. Here he is during the Trump administration, bragging about his efforts in destroying Venezuela's economy.
The first thing we did was we stopped paying them. You know, the largest source of cash had been the United States, buying about 500,000 barrels a day. We have had conversations with foreign oil traders, with foreign governments, really along the same lines. That is, you should be supporting interim President Guaido. You should not be supporting this regime. You should not be buying oil from this regime and giving them cash. And we've noted that we have a wide, broad net with our sanctions, and so we've warned people, be careful not to get caught in that net by activities that you may think don't come into it, but actually are caught by it. So
that's Elliott Abrams, then a Trump administration official. And what I love about that clip, you know, aside from his like open glee and like destroying a country's economy, is that these people are supposed to be like capitalists. Like, they love the free market. They hate socialists like Venezuela that are intervening in the market. But he's bragging about the most extreme government intervention in the market I can think of, which is coercing other countries to not engage in the market with another country. Like, nobody in Venezuela voted for Elliott Abrams to like intervene in their economy, but he's such a government interventionist when it comes to economies that he's pressuring other governments as well not to do business with Venezuela's. And the Washington Post recently had an article about the impact of these U.S. sanctions on Venezuela's economy. They note that the U.S. sanctions on Venezuela fueled a contraction that was 3 times greater than the Great Depression in the U.S. And they even feature some quotes of some Trump administration officials who acknowledged that they warned about this at the time. So here, for example, is Thomas Shannon, who was a top official in Trump's State Department. And this is what he said. This is the point I made at the time. I said the sanctions were going to grind the Venezuelan economy into dust and have huge human consequences, one of which would be out migration. That's Thomas Shannon, Undersecretary for Political Affairs under President Trump. So you had Elliot Abrams bragging about it at the time, and now you have Thomas Shannon confirming that he warned about it at the time, that this was going to be disastrous for Venezuela. Anya, you've studied this extensively, the impact of U.S. sanctions and the lengths to which the U.S. went to implement them and try to bully other countries into following U.S. orders, not doing business with Venezuela.
Yeah, and that article is fascinating because it really details a fight within the administration between rational, even just Treasury officials who said this would go too far, and just radical ideologues such as John Bolton and Elliot Abrams, who, I mean, Bolton writes openly in his memoir about crafting that sanctions package and arguing with Steve Mnuchin, the Goldman Sachs executive treasury secretary, who was actually sitting in the room saying, no, this is going too far. And it's actually going to blow back against U.S. citizens because we're going to end up paying more for oil, if we cut ourselves off from an international oil partner. And Bolton kind of just steamrolling his way through, which is kind of weird, honestly, to think about the fact that a national security official could have his way with the Treasury Department, which is what happened. He brags about it, and that article from the Treasury side confirms it. And, I know people that are on Wall Street that are like wanting to do business, and they're also in oil companies. But I know of people, I've had conversations with people that would like to do business, just normal business with the Venezuelan government. Guys who are big players on Wall Street. And the greatest obstacle is not this socialist dictatorship. It's the U.S. Treasury Department. It's the Office of Foreign Asset Control, OFAC. So yeah, who are the free market? Who are the figures preventing the free market here? It's not even, it's gone beyond just U.S. interests in terms of oil at this point, because honestly, we could have some of the oil. We could have deals, like we could cut deals, even our corporations could have maybe a few years ago before we really started going nuts with Venezuela. We just wouldn't have been able to control everything, but we could have benefited in some way from that relationship or just having a rational policy. But it's these people that are so hell-bent on zero-sum just subjugation and destruction. They want to destroy the Venezuelan state, demolish it, and just rid it of any sort of sovereign control. And these are the Elliot Abrams of the world. These are the John Boltons of the world. And for some reason, no matter how many times they fail, they still think that somehow this just one other push, just recognize Guaido or have a Guarimba here and a little riot here, and that's going to cause the government to fall. Put U.S. military trucks on the border and threaten to invade Venezuela, as they did in 2019, in order to push the military into defecting or test the strength of the military. And yet, no matter how many times they fail, they keep trying. And so it's this really, it's like a sickness at this point. It's not even rational in any sense of even, you could say, U.S. interests. Like, U.S. interests do not benefit here. It's only a little small elite of like crazy corporate agents that want to keep this zero-sum policy going, because it wouldn't be hard. It wouldn't be hard to just sit down with the Venezuelans and cut a deal. So yeah, but when it comes to the effect of U.S. sanctions on Venezuela, that clip from Elliot Abrams should be the greatest retort to anyone who claims that U.S. sanctions don't have an impact. I, in my book, cite many studies. There's the well-known UN Rapporteur report, the CEPR report, but also one of the most consequential, I think, is one published by Francisco Rodriguez, who's an opposition advisor, someone who actually advised the last candidate to run against Maduro in 2018. And he produced time series data showing just all of the blips in Venezuela's oil economy and found that any time that there was a crash, a U.S. sanction corresponded almost to the date with the drop in Venezuelan oil production. He said that was a statistical smoking gun implicating the U.S. in Venezuela's downturn, and even said that, U.S. sanctions amounted to a surgical strike on Venezuela's oil industry. So there are those experts, we could cite all day. It's not my opinion. It's just many, many different people who have studied the situation. And then Elliot Abrams himself admitting there that that's what these sanctions do. So it's ridiculous that there's even a debate at this point on the effects of sanctions. But I do think it's worth noting that this game is so it's ideological and it's almost like this dying breed within the U.S. government. Like, how much longer can the Elliot Abrams and the John Boltons of the world even last? I hope 10 years from now there will be some changes in our government where that's just no longer like the mentality that's reigning supreme.
Anya, I'm wondering if you could respond to a sentiment I get a lot on social media. Like whenever I post something critical of the U.S. policy, Venezuela, the sanctions, I get people saying, something like this, basically, like, I'm Venezuelan, I'm a leftist, but you don't understand that, our problems preceded the sanctions, that the Maduro government, that they steal from us, they only care about themselves, and they're blaming the U.S. for problems that they created themselves. This is a sentiment that I see often on social media. I'm not sure, how often you come across voices like this, but at least when I post stuff, I see it a lot.
Yeah.
And, it was only when I went to Venezuela, I saw, of course, a whole different sentiment. People who don't even have Instagram accounts and social media, who supported the government. But I'm wondering if you could respond to that from people who, claim to be on the left and they say that they support Palestine. They're against the neocons. They're against Trump and John Bolton and Joe Biden, but yet they still blame the Maduro government for a lot of the problems that Venezuela is facing today.
And to hear the rest of the interview, please go to usefulidiotspodcast.com.
What a great opportunity to talk to someone who's actually been to Venezuela, because a lot of people have opinions about that area and have never been there. So it's pretty cool.
Well, I don't want to denigrate people who have opinions about places they haven't been.
I know. As soon as I said that, I was like, that's what they say about us in Palestine.
Well, I've been to Palestine, but for example, in my case, I'm writing a book about the Ukraine proxy war. Never been to Ukraine, never been to Russia either. I could have gone to Ukraine actually recently. I was invited to go to the Donbass, to the Russian occupied parts of the Donbass. A little risky. No, well, I wasn't worried about that. It was more like, because I don't want to go just to one side of the conflict.
Right.
The problem is in Ukraine, I'm on a couple of kill lists.
I know. I was going to say, I wouldn't have done that if I was you. Yeah.
And I don't want to go to Russia either, because I don't want to, play into any kind of Russian propaganda.
Right.
efforts.
Exactly.
So
yeah.
That's my reason for not going there. But back to Anya, really fascinating. And, my take on Venezuela, if I may, is that, look, I don't know what happened with this election. I'm not an election monitor. I'm not there on the ground. I have no idea.
You're not a legal expert.
But it's like, what I do know is that a government that's been trying to overthrow Venezuela's democracy going back 2 decades through sadistic sanctions, as we talked about, and through funding opposition candidates and trying to stoke unrest, has no right to be involved. And I just, as a Western citizen, a citizen of North America, which has been intervening and meddling in Venezuela, I think the position, at least for me, is like, it's let them work it out. It's their business. The thing we can do is give them a chance to work out their own problems. And that starts with not trying to destroy their economy through these murderous sanctions. That's my take.
You know what, Aaron? I've learned so much. I'm going to have to redo my outro and say it was so great to talk to Anya Parampil, and it has nothing to do with the fact that she has been to Venezuela, because you don't need to go to a place to have a good opinion about it.
There you go.
There you go.
All right. Well, we thank you for visiting Useful Idiots, which you don't have to have a passport for. You can just listen to it or watching it. And we are grateful you joined us to do that. So Thanks so much for watching. Our website is usefulidiots.podcast.com. Go there to support the show, and we'll see you next time.
And you don't only support the show when you go to usefulidiots.podcast.com. You also get bonus content, including our full-length interview with Anya Parampil and Thursday Throwdown, your midweek dose of media madness. So it's very worth it. Bye, everyone. See you next week.
Thanks so much for listening to and watching Useful Idiots. For extended episodes, bonus content, and our weekly Thursday Throwdown episode, please subscribe at usefulidiots.podcast.com. Support the show for free by subscribing on YouTube, Rumble, and wherever you get your podcasts. And if you like the podcast, don't forget to rate and review. You can also follow us on Twitter at UsefulIdiotPod. Thanks for supporting independent media. We'll see you next time.